This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, breaking with convention, war, peace, and the presidency, as we turn to our two guests for a discussion and debate about President Obama's speech and record. We turn to Michael Eric Dyson, who's joining us here in Charlotte, North Carolina, professor of sociology at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., author of many books, including Can You Hear Me Now?, The Inspiration, Wisdom, and Insight of Michael Eric Dyson, and Making Malcolm, the Myth and Meaning of Malcolm X. And in New York City, we're joined by Glen Ford, a veteran journalist, executive editor of blackagendareport.com. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! You were inside last night in the Time Warner Cable Arena. It was supposed to be held at the Bank of America stadium, but because of weather, that was canceled. Talk about your response to his address last night.
Well, it was electrifying in the sense that Obama had before him the task of repudiating all of the myths and the lies and the deceptions and the deliberate distortions generated just a week earlier in the Republican convention, but also to rally the base, so to speak. And various aspects of that base had been either disaffected because they felt that they were marginal, or that his progressive agenda that he had initially articulated had not come to fruition. But many of them had been chastened by the intransigence of a Republican Congress that refused to acknowledge anything of worth that the man could put forth. So he's operating in a very difficult zone. So he's got to organize his resistance to the Republicans, galvanize the base, give a speech flowing enough in poetry but rooted enough in public policy. Starting with Michelle Obama a couple of nights before that, and then Bill Clinton himself in his vintage form, Obama, I think, took the baton and ran the last leg, and did so with aplomb, with verve, and with oratorical flourish.
Glen Ford, your assessment.
Well, it certainly isn't the sports-like assessment that I just heard from the good doctor. But we at Black Agenda Report have for some time been saying that Obama is not the lesser of evils, but the more effective evil. And we base that on his record and also on his rhetoric at the convention. So we would prefer to talk about what history-making events have gone down under his presidency. He's first of all created a model for austerity, a veritable model with his Deficit Reduction Commission. And he's introduced preventive detention, a law for preventive detention. He's expanded the theaters of war and drone wars, and he's made an unremitting assault on international law. And I think that possibly the biggest impact his presidency, and I'm not talking about all this light and airy stuff from the convention, but actual deeds. I think probably what will go down as his biggest contribution to history is a kind of merging of the banks and the state, with $16 trillion being infused into these banks, into Wall Street under his watch, and the line between Wall Street and the federal government virtually disappearing.
You know, what's interesting is that, look, despite the poetry of my dear friend Glen Ford, the reality is that the American left will never be able to participate not simply in the pageantry of American politics and the light and airy stuff that conventions engage in, of course, the fluff and the desiderata may be absolutely true, as Mr. Ford has indicated, but the reality is that Obama is as progressive a figure who has the chance of being elected in America. Friedrich Engels is not going to be the Secretary of Labor, and Marx will not be the Secretary of Treasury. Bottom line. Now, having said that, all of the stuff that Glen Ford has talked about is absolutely right in an ideal world where the politics of erosion can be stemmed by progressive forces that have an upsurgence, that have the possibility of getting elected. But if you ain't in the game, Miami Heat is playing it's talking about sports, is playing the Oklahoma Thunder. It's not, I'd prefer it be the Los Angeles Lakers. This is the game we're talking about. And if the American left can't be involved in the actual practice of government to offer the critical and salient insights that are available, take 2000 when siding with Nader, then Al Gore, who should have been president, who would have prevented some of the stuff that we see now happening, didn't occur. The left won't take responsibility for the fact that with the extraordinary intelligence of a Glen Ford and many other leftists notwithstanding, saying the reality is that he's the most progressive president, as Gary Dorian, an American leftist who teaches at Union Theological Seminary, argues, since FDR. Those are the stakes on the ground. We're talking about what he's done with earned income tax credit. When we talk about bailing out the American automobile industry, when we speak about the fact that Affordable Health Care Act is put forth, you talk about pre-existing conditions. When you speak about across the board what Obama has been able to do despite the intransigence of the Republican Party, then you talk about on-the-ground practices of actually achievable political goals. I think, Glenn, we have to take that into consideration.
Glen Ford.
Well, what Obama has done has actually moved the entire debate to the right. He claims that he's the one standing between the Republicans and Social Security and Medicare and the entitlements. But it was Obama 2 weeks before he even took the oath of office who said that entitlements would all be on the table. This was at a period in which the Republicans were in disarray, couldn't mount a challenge to anything. Obama followed through and created this model for austerity with his Deficit Reduction Commission, which came up with the figure of $4 trillion in cuts, which he now includes among his solemn promises to the American people. Those cuts would savage, in fact, Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. We say that he is the more effective evil because he is able, being a Democrat, to accomplish more of that right-wing agenda than the Republicans ever could. Remember, George Bush tried to privatize Social Security. He got his worst domestic defeat of his term in so doing. And the Republicans were reeling from that even in 2009. It took Barack Obama to introduce the model for austerity. And it is, it certainly is a twist on history. I think it's a lie to claim that he is the bulwark of defense. Now, we need to tell the truth. That is our first obligation, not just get in the game as the rules of the game have been laid down by either of those corporate political parties.
We're going to break and then come back to this debate. Glen Ford is the editor of blackagendareport.com, and Michael Eric Dyson is a professor of sociology at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. Breaking with Convention. We'll also play more clips from President Obama's address and hear from some others who have been taking the microphone this week here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Stay with us.